50 games should be the goal for New Orleans, but how do the Pelicans actually win that many? I'll tell you why. It has everything to do with the Smoothie King Center in clutch situations. It's a Friday episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Friday, final show of the week here, and we got a big one, talking about 50 wins for New Orleans. How do they get it done? I've got three different areas that can easily improve upon and get them to that number, and that means you're at least fighting maybe for that fourth spot in the Western Conference, a very tough Western Conference. So we're going to break it all down, what Zion Williamson and company can do to make that a reality. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And tell a friend about the show. Become an everyday. That means you listen Monday through Friday, even though we're 3 days a week right now. We'll be back to 5 days a week, probably in like 3 weeks or so, and get ready for the start of the regular season. I'm pumped. The schedule's out. We're going to look at some of the schedule stuff here today, too. So 50 wins. In my opinion, that should be the goal for New Orleans this year. Look, they won 49 games last season, and they weren't even coming close to reaching their full potential. 50 wins should be the mark. Yes, you lose Jonas Valanciunas. Yes, you lose Najee Marshall, but you added in a very big piece in Dejounte Murray as an upgrade, and more on him really in the next segment of today's show. So how do you get to 50 wins? Well, I'm going to tell you, it starts in New Orleans. It starts in the Smoothie King Center. This Pelicans team last year was not great at home. They had a winning record, but just 21-19. They actually only had 40 home games, 42 on the road because of the way the in-season tournament worked. They only won 2 more games at home than they lost, 21-19. You've got to defend home court, and the Pelicans did not do a good job of that last season. They were great on the road, 28-14. That's a really, really good road record. But if you want to win 50 games, you've got to get those ones in your backyard, on your home court, in front of your home fans. So let's break it down a little bit. 7 teams won 50 or more games last year. And on average, they had a 72% winning percentage, 72 winning percentage on the road. That comes to about 30 games. So on average, every team that had 50 or more wins went 30-11 at home last season. That's 9 more games than the Pelicans won. So how do they make that happen? And when you look at the Pelicans' schedule, I do think it kind of breaks their way to make this work really well. You know, they have a couple of longer home stretches here. So when you have 4 or more games and you're trying to hit kind of that 72% mark at home, you've got to win 3 out of 4. Well, their first long homestand starts on November 1st and goes through November 6th, and you play Indiana, Atlanta, Portland, and Cleveland. Look, Atlanta wasn't great last year. You should win that. Portland, you should win. Indiana is a toss-up, and then Cleveland, I think, is a toss-up. Maybe that's the loss. But if you can beat Indiana, beat Atlanta, beat Portland, you've gone 3-1 right there. In December, to end the year, you have a 5-game homestand that's tougher. New York, Denver, Houston, Memphis, and the Clippers. The gimmies, in that opinion, my opinion, the ones that you've got to win, are Houston and the Clippers. Clippers are going to be much worse than they were a year ago. Houston, I don't think, is on the Pelicans' level just yet. Memphis is a bit TBD with their pieces here. We've seen the Pelicans play well against the New York Knicks, and Denver is the troublesome one there, but they're worse than they were a year ago. Can you go 3-2 in that stretch? It's not that 72%, but against tough teams, I think that's what you're looking at in that stretch. And I think that's realistic. I do think you could potentially go 4-1 during that stretch. Their next long homestand is in January, 4 games. Dallas, Utah, Milwaukee. That's going to be the true test. But if you can get those 2 Utah games, potentially beat Dallas, and we saw New Orleans do well against them last year, maybe you lose to Milwaukee, that's 3-1 or 2-2. And then in February, this is a real opportunity to make up some ground. It's not exactly a long homestand. It's 2 games broken up by 1. You play Sacramento on February 12th and 13th. It's a back-to-back in New Orleans. That should be 2-0 given their record against the Kings this last season. It's a 1-game trip to Dallas. Then you're back home for 2 games against the San Antonio Spurs, who with Victor Wembanyama will be better, but are not exactly world beaters just yet. If you can go 4-0, it's not a 4-game homestand, but of those 5 games, 4 at home, can you go 4-0 there? And there's reasons to think that the Pelicans can. And if that's the case, you're looking at building what you need to get 30 wins at home. Now, the end of the season can be tough. You're going to have a 3-game stretch of Philly, Golden State, Charlotte. Philly's going to be a tough one, but you can beat Golden State. You can beat Charlotte. That's 2-1 at home. The final 2 games of the regular season, Miami and Oklahoma City, are those 2 where they're resting guys. You've got to get those. If you can do this, you can make a pretty good case for the Pelicans to get 50 wins. I don't expect them to have the same road record that they did a year ago, 28-14. I think that's going to come back down to earth. So they've got to improve at home. But now specifically, how do you do that a little bit, right? When you look at the stats between the home and road splits, they're shockingly similar. The 3-point percentage was maybe somewhat significantly different. They shot 36.8% from 3 at home, 39.7% on the road. And honestly, that's maybe the biggest thing. Maybe defensive rebounding was slightly worse at home than on the road. So what this tells me is it's little tweaks that are going to get this done. If all of the stats are very, very similar, little tweaks can really make a big difference and turn 21 wins into something close to 30. Maybe you just need to tighten things up a little bit. Look at the routines of these guys, the schedules of these guys. Maybe it really is simple as that. Look, sleeping in your own bed is nice, but if you have a routine on the road and it's leading to success, maybe this team, the franchise, needs to institute some of that here and not have things be as relaxed. Maybe there needs to be just a little bit more discipline, rigidity to that sort of thing, more of a routine. And maybe that helps them win at home. Maybe they need to have shoot-arounds at the arena versus the facility more. They only did it once last season, I believe, that they had a shoot-around at the Smoothie King Center versus at the Ochsner Sports and Performance Facility in Metairie. So maybe you need to do little things like that, and those are going to have potentially good results. I think it's pretty easy to go from 21 wins, to 30, right? A 9-game jump is significant, but I do think little tweaks can make or break this Pelican season. So start putting in those now. And it's a good thing that the team is maybe doing that. More on them and their offseason workouts in the 3rd segment of today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. So number 1 way to get to 50 wins, take care of your home court, something the Pelicans did not do last season. Another way, clutch situations. And I'm very optimistic that this is going to improve, and I'm going to share with you why coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We've got something a little bit different for you here from FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. So go get in on the opening night lines. They're all out for every single game. The Pelicans taking on the Chicago Bulls. You can get the -3.5 for the Pelicans, or just take them on the money line to win outright. There's no reason not to, because they're going to probably win that game. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, again, America's #1 sportsbook in the official sportsbook of Locked On. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. I'm on there every Wednesday, and that's a good reason for why you should listen to it. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I threw out an interesting question in terms of legacy on Locked On NBA. Feel free to answer it in the comments down below here, though. Who has a better legacy? Right, like if you're kind of looking at the pantheon of players, is it Drew Holiday or Damian Lillard? Lillard's like the by far more talented offensive player, but Holiday has 2 titles and 2 Olympic gold medals. Does that matter? Let me know what you think. I'm kind of curious. We might debate that next week too. I think that's like such a good one that I want to maybe try and tackle a little bit more with my co-host John Corrales. Okay, so we're looking at the quest for 50 wins for the New Orleans Pelicans. We just went over be better at home. There was like no reason they should have been as, not bad at home, but not good at home. So go and be better at home, and you can get to 50 wins. One more home win would have avoided the play-in tournament for New Orleans, and what could that have done for this team? Another area that they need to make some improvements in is clutch situations. And with the arrival of Dejounte Murray, I do think that this will happen, and this is going to tie into something we talked about in yesterday's show too. There's going to be a theme in this segment, even in a little bit of the last one, right? 3-point shooting, better offense. It needs to happen. The Pelicans were 14-15 in clutch situations last year. They were not good, right? Like it's kind of as simple as that. They were not particularly good in clutch situations. They need to be better. 14-15. If they can improve upon that, that is a way you get to 50 wins. And the thing that jumps out when you look at those clutch games, and that's games with it that are within 5 points, either plus or minus for your team. You're either up by 5 or fewer or down by 5 or fewer or less, whichever one it is. And there's 5 minutes or less remaining in the game. So clutch situation. Basically, it's a close game within the final 5 minutes. Too many defensive first lineups from head coach Willie Green. The Pelicans had the 4th worst offensive rating in clutch situations, but they also had the 20th ranked defense. So trotting out those defensive first lineups didn't actually give you good defense. It'd be one thing if they had the best defense in the clutch or a top 5 defense in the clutch that you could maybe justify it. They didn't. It was 20th with the 4th worst offensive rating. Like that's terrible, right? Neither of those sides is good. Skew more offensively then. If your defense isn't going to be good, skew more offensively. It's really as simple as that. The Pelicans were 7th worst in terms of 3-point percentage in clutch situations. Now, contrast that with being the 8th best field goal percentage. They shot from the field 8th best overall. That's Zion getting to the rim. Guys getting to the rim, scoring in close. And that would be top 5 if it wasn't for the 7th worst 3-point shooting team in clutch situations. Put better 3-point shooters out there on the court in clutch situations and knock down your threes, something that the Pelicans did not do last season. It didn't work. They also had the 2nd worst free throw percentage with Zion going to the line a lot in the league in clutch situations. Practice free throws more, right? Like that should help that sort of thing. It sounds simple, but maybe it actually is. Dejounte Murray is going to help with a couple of areas with this, I think. One, he's willing to shoot threes, and he makes those threes, and he makes them in clutch situations, so that's good to have him out there on the court. One of the areas, though, that the Pelicans struggled with was they turned the ball over 16% of their possessions in clutch situations. That ain't great, right? Like we don't need to really spell that one out for you, that like turning the ball over isn't going to be good in clutch situations. You have empty offensive possessions. It gives opponents fast breaks potentially too. And that's what New Orleans really was running into a lot. That's 3rd worst in the league here. So Murray just being a point guard and taking care of the ball, organizing guys a little bit better are going to help. The Pelicans are the worst Seventh worst, assist to turnover ratio. Basically, they just turned it off a ton, right? And this led to them being third worst in terms of opponent points off turnovers. That's not great, I think. They need to be better about that sort of thing. They also need to find the right balance of rebounding, something that they didn't do in clutch situations last year. They were actually seventh worst. 7 is like a number with the Pels in clutch situations. Seventh worst in opponent's second chance points. So they get an offensive board, they reset their offense, or they just put it right back in. But here's the odd stat that's kind of encouraging to try and close with a small ball lineup and maybe Zion at the 5. The Pels allowed the fewest points in the paint in clutch situations. The fewest. Now, that seems pretty good. That means you can probably get by with Zion at the 5 if you're not really allowing tons of points in the paint. It doesn't fully factor into those second chance points because teams will often just kick the ball out, reset their offense off an offensive board, try and run time off of the clock in it. So it's not like it's putbacks and things like that. You still need to sort that out. But secure that defensive board. But the good news is when you're playing half court, it's not like teams are driving inside on New Orleans. And look, they weren't running with Jonas Valanciunas down there. They were going small ball with Larry Nance Jr. Maybe that means you can do some of those other, lineups with Zion at the 5 and things like that. So that to me, I do find as something encouraging when it comes to it. The flip side of this, though, and this is going to go back to spacing now. The Pelicans were 14th. In terms of points in the paint in clutch situations. You got Zion. That needs to be better, right? How do you improve that? It's 3-point shooting and spacing. Teams are just collapsing on Zion in the paint and trying to take away the rim. And this goes to something we talked about with him yesterday. He runs into a wall and often turns the ball over. You beat that with 3-point shooting, knocking down your threes. Spacing. Offense, right? Like, that's how you're going to improve in clutch situations alongside Dejounte Murray, organizing your offense and not having you turn the ball over more. If the Pelicans go, and we don't need to see huge improvements here. If they go from 14 and 15 to, say, 17 and 12, that's going to make a big difference, I think, for New Orleans next season. 3 wins is going to be important in the Western Conference, and if New Orleans can find a way to generate those 3 wins, whether that's at home or through, clutch situations, which could be at home too, that's a good thing. This is an area that it seems like they should be much better at, but due to some of the lineups and players they were throwing out there, they were almost shooting themselves in the foot. All of the data, the eye test, literally everything, right, says they need to skew more offensively. And in yesterday's show, when we talked about the spacing and lineups, Willie Green needs to get out of his own way a little bit when it comes to this sort of thing. Play more offensive, guys. Lean more into that. You can't have the 4th worst offense and, the 10th worst defense. What are you doing there, right? You played almost 30 games, 29 games, and that's the numbers that came out. At that point, there's enough data to suggest that what you're doing isn't working and you need to do something differently. And hopefully they're going to do that this year. This is a year where Willie Green needs to show growth, needs to show improvement. Coaches improve, get better, just as players do. And it's not always linear, just like it's not always linear for a player. But this is a year where coaching can win them more games rather than holding them back or actively hurting them. And in clutch situations is really where you're going to see it. And Dejounte Murray, a guy who's done it in the clutch, scored a ton of points in the clutch last year. So whether Zion's being walled off, maybe you trust Murray in those type of situations. Ingram has been up and down in it. And look, even the clutch stats have a lot of noise in them. If you're a big stats guy like I am, small sample size is very much a thing. And clutch situations are very much that. So that's worth keeping in mind as well, that this isn't really like a huge sample size. I can pull up the totals here of minutes they played in the clutch. Again, if it's only the final 5 minutes of the game and overtime, you can run out of that pretty quickly. The Pelicans actually, of all their games that entered in clutch situations, 14 and 15, they played 94 minutes in the clutch. That's the lowest. So the sample size is a little bit skewed, I think, but I think there's definitely some things that you can see in terms of 3-point shooting, not making your threes, all of those things is worth keeping in mind. And those are areas that they can truly improve upon and should improve upon. Murray's going to help that. Playing a little bit more offensively minded, I think, is going to help that too. That could make the difference between the Pelicans winning 50 games, avoiding the play-in tournament, or being in the play-in tournament and at risk of not even making the playoffs in the first place. This is a year that you need to get this sort of stuff right. Hopefully we see the Pelicans and head coach Willie Green do that. Another area that they need to just do is get off to a blazing fast start. Blazing fast start. They can do that. They're working on it already. We'll give you the latest update on that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day, or maybe you never skip therapy day. When your schedule's packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. And even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. So when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. And look, therapy isn't just for people who've experienced major trauma. Maybe you're just down a little bit, or maybe things are just kind of difficult in your life and you need to just figure out how to navigate a situation. That's where therapy can really be great, to help you learn positive coping skills, how to set boundaries, basically just empowering yourself to be the best version of you. And if you're thinking of starting therapy a try, give BetterHelp an opportunity here. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You don't have to drive to a doctor's office, wait, sit, go in, and then drive home. Just hop on your iPad, your phone, your computer, whatever it is you use. You can have your therapy session right there. So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA to get started. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now for your second listen, Locked On Saints with host Ross Jackson, my good friend. I haven't seen him in a little bit. I'm excited to see him. He's out in California, giving you the boots on the ground perspective from training camp. He's there back in New Orleans now, covering the preseason and everything. Derek Carr going to be good. He's going to let you know over at the Locked On Saints podcast. So let's keep talking about the Pelicans getting to 50 wins here is really the thing. Getting to 50 wins, because if you want to avoid the play-in tournament, that's probably going to be like the minimum threshold you need to hit. Take care of home court advantage. Or take care of home court and give yourself a home court advantage. The fans are there. The fans are there. I think the crowds have been good. The energy has been there too, when this team deserves it. And the city is rooting for them. Show up at home. Just be better with that sort of thing. And be better in clutch situations. Which I think, look, just Murray himself is going to really help with that. And if Willie Green makes some improvements there too, there can be a significant swing. The other area that you need to do is get on the same page. Get on the same page and get off to a fast start for the year. You have the first 5 games, I think, are very winnable. Home against Chicago, at Portland twice, at Golden State twice. The Warriors are not better than they were a year ago. They're much, much worse in my opinion. That's 2 winnable games. That's 2 winnable games at Portland. But if you're discombobulated, if you're all not on the same page, if the team chemistry isn't there, if everyone doesn't understand and know their role, and have belief in one another, you could go 2-2 on that stretch, and that's a disaster in my opinion. Losing once to Portland isn't going to be good. You should go 4-0. They should start 5-0 in my opinion, or at least 4-1. You can lose 1 to Golden State on the road, but you need to all be on the same page. And the good news is they're working on that. Will Guillory of The Athletic, friend of the show, we'll have him on the show regularly this coming season again, tweeted out that they're going to be doing, organized team activities, OTAs, or just kind of unofficial team activities, workouts, somewhere in California next week. Everyone other than Daniel Tice, who's probably a little bit tired from playing in the Olympics, but you're basically going to have everyone significant all working out together, going through some practices together, doing some fun team building activities and just building chemistry. This is a good thing. Let's define roles clearly and early on. Let Zion show up crazy in shape and lead the team that way. Dejounte Murray has been wearing Pelicans gear ever since he's been traded. I doubt he's ever changed out of it. And let him start to become a leader of the team now. So that by the time you get to training camp, you get some of those like the first day of school vibes, feels out of the way, and you can just get right to work, right down to business immediately, and get off to a 5-0 start. Stack wins earlier on in the year because while the end of the schedule isn't as tough as it's been in years past, it's still not easy, and that can affect your playoff seeding. That means you can go from being out of the play-in tournament to being in the play-in tournament as they were this past year. Avoid that sort of situation. Build the chemistry. Get everyone bought in to know their roles. Remember how they've kind of switched things. Their offense, roles for people went from not Zion-centric to Zion-centric. Ingram wasn't really buying in, so they had to change things. Figure all of that stuff out now. And that way you're not making tweaks like that or major changes during the regular season, which is going to cost you wins. I want to see this team get to 50 wins. I think 50 wins is not necessarily what's going to happen, but a realistic target. I'm not saying win 60 games. I'm not saying win 55, but get 50 after you had 49 last season. Do the work to get there. Make the adjustments you need and give yourself the best chance for success. That's what I want to see this team doing. These organized team workouts with Zion being there is great. He hasn't always shown up in the past. It's been hit or miss with that. But if he's going to be there, that is a very, very encouraging sign. So I'm excited for what he's going to be able to do this year, I think, and what this team is going to be capable. This is why all offseason I've been pretty optimistic about them. I do think things are kind of lining up for a potential special season here in New Orleans. Not guaranteed, but there definitely is at least the chance that it could happen when that hasn't always been the case. And I want to see them get to that point right away. So we're going to find out. What do you think is the key to 50 wins for this team? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. If you, by the way, go to the YouTube page, there's more shorts where we have clips from the show and things like that a little bit more now for y'all to be able to see too. So never miss an episode of the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, this week of Locked On Pelicans. We'll probably do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, something like that next week. I don't know the exact schedule yet. I, again, apologize for it being a little bit inconsistent over the summer, but it's allowing me to recharge, and this has been good for me. So I'm looking forward to bringing you the best Pelicans coverage 5 days a week very, very soon. So please subscribe. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, and I'll be back with y'all next week.